He tracked her from a distance thinking she was stealing from his mansion. When she arrived at a humble home where three identical 3-year-old boys ran to embrace her, his entire perception of her shattered in an instant. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. November rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxurious duplex overlooking Central Park. Jasmine Taylor stared at the plastic stick in her trembling hands, her heart racing as 2 pink lines appeared, unmistakable and life-changing. At 22, the Columbia University computer science student hadn't planned for this, but as she placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach, an unexpected wave of hope washed over her. "A baby," she whispered, the words hanging in the marble bathroom that was larger than the bedroom she'd grown up in back in Harlem. "Our baby." She slipped the test into her pocket and checked her reflection in the mirror. Her dark eyes shone with nervous excitement, and she tucked a stray lock of curly hair behind her ear. This wasn't just any news. This was the beginning of a family with David, the man she'd fallen for despite her grandmother's warnings. The memory of their first meeting flooded back as she adjusted the collar on her blouse. 9 months ago, at the Columbia Tech Innovation Showcase, she had been presenting her algorithm for predictive healthcare analytics when she noticed him, tall, impeccably dressed, watching her with intense interest from the back of the room. David Blackwell, 32, heir to the Blackwell Properties empire, one of the largest real estate developers on the East Coast. "Your approach to healthcare accessibility is revolutionary," he had told her afterward, his confident smile making her heart skip. "The way you're applying data analysis to democratize medicine, it's exactly what this city needs." Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Theater premieres, weekend trips to the Hamptons, intimate dinners at restaurants where reservations took months to secure. When he'd suggested she move into his Central Park West apartment 3 months ago, her grandmother had gripped her hands tightly. "That man comes from a different world, Jasmine," the elderly Jamaican woman had warned. "Men like him don't bring girls like us home to mama." Jasmine had dismissed the concern as old-fashioned thinking. "David sees me, Grandma. Not where I come from, but who I am and what I can become." The memory faded as Jasmine moved to the kitchen, carefully chopping vegetables for the celebration dinner she'd planned. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother asking about her day. She typed a quick response, promising to call tomorrow, deliberately omitting any mention of the pregnancy test. That conversation needed to happen in person. She stirred the simmering curry, her grandmother's recipe, the spicy aroma filling the expansive kitchen with warmth. David had once called her cooking an exotic adventure, a comment that had initially made her smile but later caused her to wonder if that's how he saw her too. Exotic, different, temporary. No, she scolded herself. Tonight would prove otherwise. Tonight would be the beginning of their family story. The sound of keys in the door made her stomach clench with anticipation. David's footsteps echoed on the marble floor, heavier than usual, missing their typical energy. "In the kitchen," she called out, her voice higher than intended. David appeared in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim hallway light. His usually perfectly coiffed dark hair was disheveled, his tie loosened. The financial crisis gripping Wall Street had been brutal on everyone, even the seemingly untouchable Blackwell empire. "Something smells good," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He loosened his tie further, dropping his briefcase on the counter. "I can't stay long, though. Emergency board meeting at 8. Jasmine's heart sank. "I made your favorite, Grandma's curry, and I thought, maybe we could talk? I have some news." He poured himself a generous glass of scotch, swirling the amber liquid. "Can it wait? The market dropped another 300 points today. My father's breathing down my neck about the Murray Hill project." "It's important," she insisted softly, turning off the stove. Her hands were trembling again. David sighed, relenting. "All right. What's this news that can't wait?" Jasmine took a deep breath, reaching for his hand. "David, I'm pregnant." The glass of scotch froze halfway to his lips. For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the windows and the distant honking of Manhattan traffic. Then something shifted in his eyes. Not joy or surprise, but something cold and calculating that Jasmine had never seen directed at her before. "Pregnant?" he repeated, placing his untouched scotch on the counter with deliberate care. "You're sure?" She nodded, reaching into her pocket for the test. "I took this earlier today. I know it's unexpected, but I thought—" "You thought what, exactly?" His voice had taken on an edge that made her stomach tighten with unease. "I thought we could figure it out together," she said, confusion creeping into her voice. "I know the timing isn't perfect, but—" David laughed, a harsh sound that cut through her words. "Perfect? A pregnancy? Now? Do you have any idea what this means for my public image? For the family business?" Jasmine stepped back as if physically struck. "Your image? David, I'm talking about our child." "Our child," he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "Jasmine, surely you didn't think that we were heading towards some kind of family life together?" The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "But we've been living together. You said you loved me." "I enjoyed our time together," he said, his voice now professionally detached. "You were refreshing. Different. But clearly you've misunderstood the nature of our relationship." Tears pricked at Jasmine's eyes. "Misunderstood? How could I misunderstand when you asked me to move in? When you talked about our future?" David's expression hardened. "A Harlem scholarship girl doesn't have a place in the society I move in. You're insufficient, common, without the necessary polish." He gestured vaguely around the apartment. "This, the jewelry, the events, it was all lending a bit of sparkle to your otherwise ordinary life." Each word landed like a physical blow. Jasmine felt her chest constrict, making it hard to breathe. "I was an experiment to you? Something exotic to show off to your friends?" "You're smart, Jasmine. I thought you understood the rules of the game." His voice was cold, almost bored. "Marriage? Children? That was never on the table. You don't belong in my world. You never did." He walked to his desk with clinical detachment, pulling out a checkbook. The sound of the drawer sliding open echoed like a gunshot in the silent apartment. "I'll be generous," he said, scribbling on a check. "Take care of this." He gestured toward her stomach. "And we can pretend this mistake never happened." He held out the check, $20,000. The amount made Jasmine's vision blur with rage and humiliation. With trembling hands, she took the check and tore it into pieces, letting them flutter to the floor like bitter confetti. "It was never love for you, was it?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I was just an exotic experience, something to brag about?" David straightened his tie, his expression closing like a vault. "This emotional display is exactly what I'm talking about, Jasmine. Too unrefined, too raw." He picked up his phone. "I'll have Jennifer and Mark come pack your things. You should be out by morning." "Out? You're throwing me out? Tonight?" The reality of her situation crashed down on her. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not really my concern, is it?" he replied, already typing on his phone. "You managed before me. You'll manage after." Within 30 minutes, David's efficient assistants arrived, clinical and professional as they packed her possessions into hastily procured suitcases. Jasmine sat silently on the edge of the couch, watching as her life was systematically removed from the glossy interior design magazine space she'd foolishly begun to think of as home. David remained in his study, door closed, on calls that seemed conveniently urgent. When the assistants were finished, they nodded to her with empty professionalism. "A car is waiting downstairs, Ms. Taylor." In the elevator, Jasmine caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Face pale, eyes red-rimmed but spine straight. She wouldn't break, not here, not where he or his people could see. The doorman who had greeted her cheerfully every day for months now averted his eyes as she passed, her changed status instantly recognized. Outside, the November rain had turned into a freezing drizzle. The waiting car, not David's personal driver, but a service, would take her wherever she wanted to go, as if she had somewhere to go. "Harlem," she told the driver, giving her grandmother's address. 135th and Lenox. As the car pulled away from the gleaming tower, Jasmine watched the doorman hurry to assist a wealthy couple entering the building. His smile suddenly returned. Just like that, she had been erased from that world, deemed insufficient for its rarefied air. The ride uptown was a blur of lights and rain. When they arrived at her grandmother's modest building, Jasmine thanked the driver mechanically, dragging her hastily packed suitcases up the steps to the security door. She pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B, praying her grandmother was home. "Who is it?" came the crackly response. "It's me, Grandma," Jasmine said, her voice finally breaking. "Can I come home?" The buzzer sounded immediately. By the time Jasmine reached the third floor, her grandmother stood in the doorway, her small frame tense with concern. One look at Jasmine's face told her everything she needed to know. "Oh, child," she said, opening her arms. Jasmine collapsed into the embrace, the sobs she'd been holding back finally breaking free. Her grandmother held her tightly, murmuring soothing words in the Jamaican patois of Jasmine's childhood. Inside the small apartment that smelled of ginger and allspice, Jasmine sank onto the worn couch where she'd spent countless hours studying her way into Columbia. Her grandmother brought her tea, sitting beside her, patient and steady. "He threw me out," Jasmine finally said, her voice hollow. "I told him I was pregnant and he said I was insufficient, common, that I didn't belong in his world." Her grandmother's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained calm. "And the baby? He wanted me to take care of it. Tried to give me money." Jasmine's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "But this baby is mine, Grandma, mine." The older woman nodded, placing her weathered hand over Jasmine's. "Then we will make a way. We always have." That night, curled up in her childhood bed, Jasmine stared at the water stain on the ceiling that she'd once imagined was shaped like Africa. Outside, the same rain that had tapped against floor-to-ceiling windows now beat against a cracked pane her grandmother had sealed with duct tape. Two worlds, separated by just a few miles of Manhattan geography, but divided by chasms of privilege and power. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, Jasmine couldn't possibly know that the night of humiliation she'd just endured would become the first chapter of a story that, 15 years later, would make David Blackwell shrink with shame at the most exclusive event in Manhattan. As she drifted into uneasy sleep, Jasmine couldn't possibly know that the night of humiliation she'd just endured would become the first chapter of a story that, 15 years later, would make David Blackwell shrink with shame at the most exclusive event in Manhattan. The morning light filtered through the cracked window, casting fragmented shadows across Jasmine's face. 2 weeks had passed since David had discarded her like an outdated accessory. She stood in line at the unemployment office, surrounded by others whose lives had been upended by the financial crisis. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Wall Street executives received golden parachutes, she clutched a manila folder containing her meager employment history. "Next," called a tired-looking woman behind a scratched plexiglass window. Jasmine stepped forward, straightening her posture despite the wave of nausea that had become her constant morning companion. "I need to file for unemployment benefits." "Former employer?" "Tech Solutions, Inc. I was an intern." Jasmine slid her termination letter through the slot. The letter was deliberately vague, citing company restructuring needs, but the timing, 2 days after she'd been evicted from David's apartment, made the real reason transparent. The woman scanned the document. Reason for termination? Jasmine swallowed hard. Officially, downsizing. And unofficially? The woman looked up, her eyes softening slightly at Jasmine's expression. Office politics, Jasmine replied quietly. What she couldn't explain was how quickly the whispers had spread after her relationship with David imploded, how her direct supervisor had called her into his office with uncomfortable apologies about avoiding complications with important clients like Blackwell Properties. 3 days later, Jasmine stood behind the counter at Harlem's Sunrise Diner, her feet already swelling inside the second-hand shoes her grandmother had found at a church donation bin. The plastic name tag read, "Jasmine, happy to serve you," in cheerful letters that contrasted with the reality of her situation. "Table 5 needs more coffee and 7 is complaining their eggs are cold," barked Manny, the floor manager, as he brushed past her. Jasmine grabbed the coffee pot, ignoring the churning in her stomach as the smell hit her. The morning sickness was relentless, made worse by exhaustion. She'd been up until 2 in the morning typing legal documents for a small law firm downtown, her second job, one that let her work remotely during the precious few hours she wasn't waitressing or sleeping. "How you holding up, baby girl?" asked Gloria, an older waitress who had taken Jasmine under her wing. "You looking greener than yesterday." "I'm fine," Jasmine insisted, though she had to pause and breathe deeply before approaching table 5. "No, you ain't," Gloria countered, intercepting her and taking the coffee pot. "Go sit down for 5 minutes before you faint into somebody's pancakes." In the cramped break room, Jasmine collapsed onto a folding chair, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "Just hang in there, little one," she whispered. "We're going to figure this out." That evening, Jasmine sat across from her grandmother at their tiny kitchen table, staring at the bills spread before them. The elderly woman silently counted out dollars from her Social Security check, setting aside money for rent, utilities, and now food for 3. "I got a second job," Jasmine announced. "Data entry for a law firm. I can do it from home after my shift at the diner." Her grandmother looked up, concern etched in the deep lines of her face. "You're already exhausted, child. What about the baby?" "The baby needs me to work," Jasmine replied firmly. "And I've applied for a programming freelance position too. Once I start showing, the diner might let me go. I need backups." Her grandmother reached across the table, her work-worn hand covering Jasmine's. "That man should be taking responsibility." Jasmine shook her head decisively. "He doesn't deserve to know my child, and I won't beg for crumbs from someone who considered me disposable." Later that night, Jasmine hunched over her old laptop, the screen's blue light illuminating her tired face as she typed code for a small project she'd found online. $5 an hour wasn't much, but every dollar counted now. Her mind drifted to the algorithms class she'd be missing next semester. The scholarship covered tuition, but with her new work schedule, attending classes had become impossible. "1 semester," she promised herself. "I'll take 1 semester off, save some money, then go back." Deep down, she wondered if she was lying to herself. The next morning, Jasmine sat in the community clinic waiting room, surrounded by other women with various stages of pregnancy evident. When her name was called, she followed a nurse into a small examination room with peeling paint and outdated equipment, a stark contrast to the private Manhattan OB-GYN David had once offhandedly mentioned his sister used. Dr. Williams, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, squirted cold gel onto Jasmine's stomach. "Let's see what we've got here," she said, moving the ultrasound wand. Jasmine turned toward the grainy black-and-white screen, eager for her first glimpse of the baby. Dr. Williams moved the wand slowly, her expression changing from professional detachment to surprise. "Well," she said, adjusting her glasses. "Ms. Taylor, do you see these 3 separate areas here?" She pointed to 3 distinct pulsating spots on the screen. Jasmine's breath caught. "3?" "Doctor," Williams nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Congratulations, you're carrying triplets." The room seemed to spin around Jasmine. "Triplets," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "3 babies?" "All with strong heartbeats," Dr. Williams confirmed. "You're about 10 weeks along." As the doctor continued explaining the higher risks and special care needed for a multiple pregnancy, Jasmine stared at the 3 tiny heartbeats flickering on the screen. 3 lives, not 1. 3 babies who would depend entirely on her. "The universe has quite the sense of humor," she finally said, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. The doctor looked confused, but Jasmine was thinking of David's dismissive words: insufficient, common, unrefined. Now she carried 3 lives that shared his DNA, 3 futures he had rejected without even knowing. As she left the clinic, clutching the printout of the ultrasound, Jasmine made a silent vow to the 3 tiny beings inside her. "No one will ever call you insufficient. I promise." The following weeks blurred together in a haze of exhaustion. Jasmine worked morning shifts at the diner, afternoon hours doing data entry, and spent evenings on freelance coding projects. Her grandmother prepared traditional Jamaican remedies for her persistent nausea: ginger tea with honey, mint leaves, small portions of plain rice. "You must rest more," the elderly woman insisted one evening when Jasmine nearly fell asleep at the dinner table. "These babies need their mother healthy." "We need to eat," Jasmine countered, forcing herself to finish her meal before returning to her laptop. December turned to January, and Jasmine's body began to change more rapidly than expected with the multiple pregnancy. Her diner uniform grew tight, then impossible to button. The manager noticed, his eyes lingering on her expanding waistline. "I'm pregnant," Jasmine admitted before he could ask. "But I can still do my job." He shifted uncomfortably. "How far along?" 14 weeks. "With triplets," her grandmother added proudly from her booth by the window, where she'd taken to sitting during Jasmine's shifts, knitting tiny hats in 3 different colors. The manager's eyebrows shot up. "Triplets? Jesus, Taylor." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, customers don't like seeing very pregnant waitresses. Makes them uncomfortable. I can keep you on another month, maybe 2, but after that—" Jasmine nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Another job with an expiration date. At the beginning of her 3rd trimester, Jasmine sat in her social worker's office trying to focus through the fog of exhaustion as the woman explained the benefits available to her. "WIC will help with nutrition, and you qualify for emergency housing assistance," the social worker explained. "Have you considered pursuing child support from the father?" Jasmine shook her head firmly. "That's not an option." The social worker sighed. "Ms. Taylor, raising triplets alone will be extraordinarily difficult, financially and otherwise. The courts can—" "I said no," Jasmine interrupted more sharply than intended. "I don't want anything from him." What Jasmine couldn't explain was the fierce protectiveness she felt. David had deemed her unworthy of his world. Her children, her sons, according to the last ultrasound, would never have to face that rejection. They would never know what it felt like to be appraised and found lacking by a man like David Blackwell. By her 8th month, Jasmine had been let go from the diner as predicted. Her body, now carrying 3 growing boys, made standing for hours impossible anyway. She focused on her remote work, typing data and code until her swollen fingers cramped, stopping only when her grandmother insisted. One evening in late March, after working 16 hours straight to meet a deadline, Jasmine dragged herself onto the subway. The car was packed with commuters, none offering a seat to the visibly pregnant woman clutching the overhead rail. As the train lurched between stations, Jasmine felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The fluorescent lights blurred, voices around her became distant, and then darkness. She woke to the concerned face of a paramedic. "Ms. Taylor, can you hear me?" Jasmine tried to sit up, panic seizing her. "My babies—" "Stay still," the paramedic instructed gently. "We're taking you to the hospital. You fainted on the subway." In the emergency room, a doctor checked the triplets' heartbeats while explaining the dangers of her condition. "You're experiencing preterm labor symptoms. Your blood pressure is dangerously high." "But I'm only 32 weeks, Jasmine protested. "They're not ready." "And you're severely anemic and exhausted," The doctor continued. You need complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy, or you risk delivering extremely premature infants. The words hit Jasmine like physical blows. Bed rest meant no work. No work meant no income. I can't, she whispered. I have to work. There's no one else. That night, after being stabilized and released with strict instructions, Jasmine lay in her narrow bed in her grandmother's apartment. Rain tapped against the window with its cracked pane, now mended with fresh tape. Her hand rested on her enormous belly, feeling the movements of the 3 lives within. The pain of David's rejection had transformed into something new, absolute determination. The memory of his cold eyes and cutting words, insufficient, common, without the necessary polish, now fueled a fire within her. My sons will never know what it means to be called insufficient, she murmured to her belly. One day all of Manhattan will know your names, and the man who rejected us will swallow every cruel word he spoke. In the early hours of an April morning, Jasmine was rushed to the public hospital as contractions came fast and strong. After 14 hours of labor, her 3 sons entered the world, small but surprisingly healthy for triplets born at 34 weeks. As she held them for the first time in the small hospital room, she studied their perfect faces. Marcus, she whispered to the firstborn. Malcolm, to the second. And Martin, to the third. Names of great black leaders who had changed the world against all odds. While holding the 3 infants in the small public hospital room, she made a promise. We will change the world, my sons, and we'll do it together, without needing him. While holding the 3 infants in the small public hospital room, she made a promise. We will change the world, my sons, and we'll do it together, without needing him. April sunshine streamed through the windows of Jasmine's grandmother's apartment, casting a golden glow across the makeshift nursery corner. 3 second-hand cribs, donated by a local church group, stood against the wall. Above them hung a mobile fashioned from colorful paper that Jasmine had folded during her final weeks of bed rest, a small attempt to create beauty in their modest surroundings. There you go, little Marcus, Jasmine's grandmother cooed, placing the freshly diapered infant back in his crib. At 4 weeks old, the triplets had already developed distinct personalities. Marcus, the firstborn, was watchful and calm. Malcolm, the middle child, possessed a demanding cry that ensured his needs were addressed promptly. Martin, the youngest by mere minutes, was the most sensitive, requiring extra soothing. I don't know how you tell them apart, said Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor who had come to help. They look identical to me. Jasmine smiled, gently rocking Malcolm. Marcus has that tiny birthmark behind his ear. Malcolm's left eyebrow arches higher, and Martin's nose is slightly more rounded at the tip. She traced a finger along Malcolm's cheek. A mother knows. You're a natural with them, Mrs. Rodriguez observed. Jasmine didn't feel natural. She felt exhausted, overwhelmed, and frequently terrified. But she kept those feelings buried beneath determination. Graduation ceremony is next week, Jasmine's grandmother reminded her, carefully folding tiny onesies donated by a community organization. You should attend. You've earned that diploma. Jasmine shook her head. I can't leave the boys for that long, and I can't bring 3 infants to a formal ceremony. The regret in her voice was palpable. She had completed her coursework through online classes during her bed rest, submitting her final assignments from the hospital while in early labor. The degree would be mailed to her. That night, after her grandmother and Mrs. Rodriguez had gone to bed, Jasmine sat in the living room surrounded by her sleeping sons in their portable bassinets. The apartment was quiet except for their soft breathing. She opened her laptop, a refurbished model purchased with her last paycheck, and began working on job applications. Columbia computer science graduates typically received multiple offers before graduation. Jasmine had received none. Whether due to the economic downturn or the whispers that had followed her departure from her internship, Her applications were met with polite rejections or silence. "We'll find a way," she whispered to her sleeping boys. "Somehow." 2 months later, Jasmine stood at the front of a small chapel, holding Martin while her grandmother held Malcolm and Mrs. Rodriguez held Marcus. The community pastor smiled warmly as he blessed each child. "What names have you chosen for these children?" he asked. "Marcus Garvey Taylor," Jasmine said clearly, nodding toward the infant in Mrs. Rodriguez's arms. "Malcolm X. Taylor," she continued, looking at her grandmother. "And Martin Luther King Taylor," she finished, kissing Martin's forehead. "Powerful names," the pastor commented. "Names of men who changed the world," Jasmine replied. "Men who faced adversity and triumphed." After the ceremony, a small gathering of neighbors and church members celebrated with a potluck lunch in the community hall. Jasmine watched as her sons were passed from arm to arm, admired and blessed with good wishes. "Such beautiful boys," said Mrs. Washington, the church secretary. "And the father? Will he be joining their lives?" The question, though kindly meant, felt like a finger pressed against a bruise. "No," Jasmine replied simply. "It's just us." As summer turned to fall, Jasmine established a relentless routine. With her grandmother's help, she cared for the triplets while continuing her job search and taking on small freelance coding projects that barely covered essentials. Her days began at 5 in the morning with feedings and ended well past midnight after completing whatever online work she could find. The apartment became increasingly cramped as the boys grew. Baby items occupied every available surface: bottles, diapers, tiny clothes in constant need of washing. Space that had been tight for 2 was now impossible for 5. "I applied for family housing assistance again," Jasmine told her grandmother one evening as they bathed the boys in the kitchen sink. "They said the waiting list is 2 years. Her grandmother sighed, gently washing Malcolm's hair. "We'll manage, child. We always do." In November, as the triplets reached 7 months, Jasmine received an unexpected call from Dr. Raymond Chen, a professor she'd impressed during her time at Columbia. "I have a small startup looking for a part-time programmer," he explained. "The pay isn't great, but you can work remotely, set your own hours." Jasmine nearly cried with relief. "I'll take it." The job allowed her to work during the boys' nap times and after they went to sleep. The money was modest but steady, enough to buy diapers and formula without relying on donations. More importantly, it kept her skills sharp and her resume active. As winter settled over the city, Jasmine's grandmother's health began to decline. The elderly woman who had been Jasmine's rock developed a persistent cough that wouldn't respond to home remedies. "It's just a cold," she insisted, even as her breathing became labored. Jasmine finally convinced her to see a doctor, who diagnosed pneumonia and prescribed antibiotics and rest, a luxury in their household. "You take care of the boys," Jasmine told her firmly. "I'll handle everything else." For weeks, Jasmine operated on minimal sleep, caring for 3 increasingly mobile infants and her ailing grandmother while maintaining her remote work. Dark circles formed permanent shadows beneath her eyes. Her clothes hung loose on her frame as meals became an afterthought. On a snowy December evening, as the triplets approached their first Christmas, Jasmine sat at the kitchen table programming while her grandmother knitted by the space heater. The boys played on a blanket nearby, babbling to each other in their private language. "Look," her grandmother whispered suddenly. Jasmine turned to see Malcolm pulling himself up using the edge of the coffee table, his tiny legs wobbling with the effort. Before she could react, he let go and took one shaky step forward, then another, before plopping down on his bottom with a surprised expression. "His first steps!" Jasmine gasped, scrambling for her phone to record the moment. Within minutes, Marcus followed his brother's example, managing 3 steps before falling. Martin watched his brothers intently, but seemed content to observe rather than participate. "They're competing already," Jasmine's grandmother chuckled. "Just like brothers should." That night, after the boys were asleep, Jasmine searched through her phone for the video she'd captured. As she watched Malcolm's first tentative steps, tears filled her eyes. Tears of joy mingled with sadness that these moments had no other witness who shared her blood connection to the boys. "David should be here," her grandmother said softly from the doorway, reading her thoughts. "Those boys deserve their father." Jasmine wiped her eyes quickly. They deserve better than someone who would reject their mother as unworthy. The next morning, while nursing Martin, Jasmine scrolled through news on her phone, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. A headline caught her eye. "Blackwell Properties announces luxury development amid economic recovery." Below was a photo of David at a press conference, smiling confidently beside a woman Jasmine recognized as Senator Mitchell's daughter. "Blackwell Properties remains committed to New York's future," the article quoted him. "And personally, I'm committed to building a future with my fiancée, Catherine." Jasmine stared at the image. David in an impeccably tailored suit, arm around his perfectly polished society bride-to-be. The pain she expected didn't come. Instead, she felt a surprising sense of relief. He had moved on, creating the perfect life he'd wanted. And somehow, despite everything, she was building her own path forward. As April approached again, preparations for the triplets' first birthday occupied every spare moment. Jasmine baked cupcakes late at night after finishing her coding work. Her grandmother, now recovered from her illness, sewed small stuffed animals as gifts. The celebration was modest. A few neighbors, church friends, and the elderly couple from upstairs who often watched the boys when Jasmine had video meetings. The community center allowed them to use the small kitchen for the afternoon. "Make a wish," Jasmine encouraged as she held Marcus up to the single candle on the cupcake they would share. With her grandmother's help, all three boys blew out the flame together, their faces lit with wonder at the applause that followed. Later that evening, as Jasmine tucked the exhausted birthday boys into their cribs, her grandmother appeared with a small envelope. "A letter came for you," she said, "from Columbia." Jasmine opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was an invitation to present her senior project at an upcoming technology symposium, a courtesy extended to outstanding graduates whose work showed particular promise. "My healthcare algorithm," she whispered. "They want me to present it." "You should go," her grandmother insisted. "Show them what you've accomplished." 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood nervously at the back of a lecture hall at Columbia, watching as students and faculty filled the seats. The triplets were with her grandmother and Mrs. Rodriguez, a rare separation that filled her with anxiety despite her trust in their care. Professor Jenkins, who had mentored her senior project, approached with a warm smile. "Jasmine Taylor, we've missed your brilliance in these halls." "Thank you for the invitation," she replied, smoothing her second-hand blazer. "I wasn't sure my work warranted inclusion." "Your algorithm for predicting cardiac anomalies through pattern recognition is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we encourage," he assured her. "Several faculty members from the medical school are here specifically to hear your presentation." When her turn came, Jasmine approached the podium, willing her voice not to shake. "My algorithm began as a personal project," she explained, thinking of her grandmother's heart condition. "Healthcare technology often fails to reach those who need it most, the underserved, the uninsured, those deemed insufficient by our current systems." The word hung in the air for a moment before she continued, describing the technical aspects of her work. As questions followed her presentation, Jasmine felt a familiar confidence returning, the certainty in her intellectual abilities that no personal rejection could diminish. Afterward, several professors and students approached with questions and comments. Among them was Dr. Raymond Chen, who introduced her to a colleague from the university hospital. "We'd be interested in seeing more developed applications of your algorithm," the doctor told her. "If you're continuing this work, we might have resources to assist with testing." Hope flickered in Jasmine's chest. "I am definitely continuing this work." That evening, as she rode the subway back to Harlem, clutching a business card from the hospital administrator, Jasmine allowed herself to imagine possibilities that had seemed impossible just hours before. When she arrived home, she found her grandmother dozing in a chair while the triplets played contentedly in their play yard, a second-hand gift from the church. Jasmine gently lifted Marcus, who reached for her with a smile of recognition that melted her heart. "Mama," he said clearly, his first recognizable word. Malcolm and Martin looked up at the sound, both reaching for her with matching expressions. "Mama!" they echoed in unison. Jasmine gathered all three into her arms, tears of joy streaming down her face as they patted her cheeks with tiny hands. In that moment, the challenges, the cramped apartment, the financial struggles, the exhaustion, faded against the enormous love she felt. While holding her 3 one-year-olds close, whispering dreams into their tiny ears, Jasmine couldn't predict that in 15 years, these same little boys would stand tall beside her as she received accolades the medical world had never bestowed on a single innovator, nor that the doctors who doubted her ability to raise triplets alone would one day use her software to save millions of lives worldwide. While holding her 3 one-year-olds close, whispering dreams into their tiny ears, Jasmine couldn't predict that in 15 years, these same little boys would stand tall beside her as she received accolades the medical world had never bestowed on a single innovator, nor that the doctors who doubted her ability to raise triplets alone would one day use her software to save millions of lives worldwide. 4 years passed in a blur of milestones and challenges. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of the auditorium as Jasmine adjusted her graduation cap, scanning the crowd for 3 identical faces. The boys, now 4 years old, sat in the front row beside their great-grandmother, each wearing miniature button-down shirts and clip-on ties. Malcolm waved enthusiastically when he caught her eye, while Marcus maintained his characteristic solemnity. Martin, ever the observer, clutched a drawing he'd made for the occasion. "Jasmine Taylor," the dean announced, graduating with highest honors in computer science. As she crossed the stage to receive her diploma, cheers erupted from the front row. The triplets jumped to their feet, clapping with unrestrained pride. Jasmine blinked back tears, remembering how she'd completed her final exams from a hospital bed while in early labor with them. The struggle to finish her degree while raising 3 children had been monumental, but today marked the culmination of years of sacrifice. Later, as they celebrated with ice cream cones in the park, Jasmine watched her sons chase each other around the playground. Malcolm climbed fearlessly to the top of the slide, calculating his trajectory with unexpected precision for a 4-year-old. Marcus organized other children into an impromptu game with rules he seemed to invent on the spot. Martin sat slightly apart, intently studying a beetle crawling across the wood chips. "They're special, those boys," her grandmother said, easing herself onto the bench beside Jasmine. "Not just smart, they see the world differently." 3 weeks after graduation, Jasmine stood beside her grandmother's hospital bed, the triplets unusually quiet in chairs against the wall. The elderly woman's breathing had become labored overnight, her heart condition worsening despite medication. "Don't worry about me," her grandmother whispered, squeezing Jasmine's hand. "You focus on those boys, and finish that program you've been working on, the one that could have caught this sooner." 2 days later, in the pre-dawn stillness of a June morning, Jasmine's grandmother slipped away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was a simple affair, a gathering of neighbors, church members, and the small community that had supported them through the years. The triplets, dressed in second-hand suits, stood solemnly beside their mother, their usual energy subdued by the gravity of the occasion. That night, after tucking the exhausted boys into bed, Jasmine sat at her small desk, staring at the code on her laptop screen through tear-filled eyes. The cardiac diagnostic algorithm she'd begun developing as a student project had become an obsession after her grandmother's first health scare. Now, it felt like a promise to fulfill. "I'll finish it," she whispered to the empty room. "I'll make it work." The job search that followed graduation proved challenging. Interviews that began promisingly often cooled when Jasmine mentioned being a single mother to triplets. The unspoken questions lingered in potential employers' eyes. How reliable could she be? How much time would she need off? Who would care for the children during crises? On a sweltering August morning, Jasmine sat across from a hiring manager at Maid Solutions, a small healthcare software company in Brooklyn. She'd been forthright about her family situation in the application, hoping to avoid another awkward revelation. "Your academic credentials are impressive, Ms. Taylor," the woman said, reviewing her resume. "And your initial work on the cardiac diagnostic algorithm shows promise. But I'm curious, how did you manage to maintain such high grades while raising 3 children alone?" The question, though familiar, still stung. Jasmine straightened in her chair. "The same way I'd manage this job, Ms. Patel. With organization, determination, and understanding that excellence isn't negotiable, regardless of circumstances." The woman looked up, a hint of appreciation in her eyes. "Fair answer. When can you start?" 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood outside the boys' preschool, adjusting her second-hand blazer nervously. It was their first day, and hers at the new job. Mrs. Rodriguez had agreed to pick them up at noon since Jasmine couldn't leave work early on her first day. "You look pretty, Mama," Martin said, reaching up to touch the small pearl earrings she wore, her grandmother's, the only jewelry she owned. "Are you scared?" Malcolm asked perceptively, noticing her tension. Jasmine knelt to their level. "A little, just like you might be about new school. But being brave doesn't mean not feeling scared. It means doing what needs to be done anyway." Marcus, ever practical, checked his tiny watch, a birthday gift from a church member. "We should go in now. Being late is inefficient." Inside her cubicle at Maid Solutions, Jasmine quickly immersed herself in the company's projects while discreetly placing a small framed photo of the triplets on her desk. Her colleagues seemed pleasant if distant, making polite conversation during lunch breaks. "You're the new programmer, right?" asked Tom from marketing, stopping by her desk. "We heard you're some kind of coding prodigy from Columbia." Jasmine smiled modestly. "I wouldn't say prodigy, just dedicated." "Well, we need dedicated. The cardio track project is months behind schedule, and the hospital contract is in jeopardy." By the end of her first week, Jasmine had identified several key issues in the troubled project's code. She stayed late on Friday, long after other employees had left, methodically addressing the problems. When she finally checked the time, she realized with alarm that it was nearly 7 o'clock. Mrs. Rodriguez would be wondering where she was. She called apologetically, relieved to hear the boys were happily helping make empanadas in the elderly woman's kitchen. "I'm leaving now. I'm so sorry." "They're fine, mijita," Mrs. Rodriguez assured her. "They've been telling me about their day. Your Martin already knows all his letters. The teacher was very impressed." The following week, Jasmine was called into her supervisor's office. She entered nervously, wondering if her late hours had somehow caused problems. "The fixes you implemented on cardio track," her supervisor began. "They've resolved issues we've been struggling with for months. How did you identify the pattern anomaly so quickly?" Jasmine explained her approach, drawing on her work with the cardiac algorithm she'd developed. "It's similar to the pattern recognition I've been exploring in my personal project." "This personal project, would you be willing to share more details? It might have applications for our upcoming diagnostic suite." That night, after the triplets were asleep, Jasmine worked until dawn refining her algorithm. The possibility that her work might find practical application, might actually help patients like her grandmother, fueled her despite the exhaustion. The boys' preschool teacher requested a meeting in late September. Jasmine rearranged her work schedule, arriving at the school with trepidation. Had there been behavior problems? Difficulties adjusting? "Mrs. Taylor," the teacher began. "Ms." Jasmine corrected gently. "Ms. Taylor, I wanted to discuss your son's unusual aptitudes," the teacher continued. In 20 years of early childhood education, I've never encountered children quite like them. She proceeded to explain how Malcolm had corrected her arithmetic during a counting exercise, how Marcus had memorized an entire picture book after a single reading, and how Martin had constructed complex block structures that demonstrated advanced spatial reasoning. "They're testing well beyond kindergarten level," she explained, showing Jasmine the assessment results. "We'd like to move them to our advanced learning program, with your permission, of course." Jasmine stared at the charts, pride mingling with concern. She'd always known her boys were bright, but seeing the stark evidence of their exceptional abilities triggered a protective instinct. Gifted children faced their own challenges, expectations, social adjustments, the pressure to achieve. "They need to be children first," she said finally. "I want them challenged, but not at the expense of their emotional development." The teacher nodded. "Of course, we'll create a balanced approach." As autumn deepened, Jasmine fell into an exhausting routine. Days at MedTech, evenings with the boys, and late nights developing her algorithm. The apartment they'd moved to after her grandmother's passing was slightly larger but still modest, a two-bedroom in a safer part of Harlem, stretched to the limits of her entry-level salary. One evening, as she helped the boys with a science project they'd insisted on starting, a model of the circulatory system made from red yarn and paper, her phone rang. It was Dr. Raymond Chen from Columbia. "I saw your name on a research paper citation," he said after pleasantries. "You're still working on that cardiac diagnostic algorithm?" "Yes," she admitted, watching Malcolm carefully trace a heart outline. "It's slow progress given my schedule, but I'm committed to it." "There's a small technology symposium at the medical school next month. Would you consider presenting your current work? Several cardiologists expressed interest after your last presentation." Jasmine hesitated, thinking of the logistics, childcare, preparation time, the state of her project. "I'd need to bring my sons. They're 4 now, and my regular sitter can't do evenings." "Bring them," Dr. Chen said without hesitation. "My wife can watch them during your presentation. They might enjoy the university environment. It's never too early to plant those seeds." The night before the symposium, Jasmine practiced her presentation while the boys watched attentively from the couch. To her surprise, they asked thoughtful questions and even offered suggestions on her slides. "You should use a different color for the anomaly indicators," Malcolm advised seriously. "Red is more attention-getting than orange." "And your explanation of arrhythmia is too complicated," Marcus added. "You should say, 'heart beating wrong' first, then the technical words." Martin, typically the quietest, pointed to a section of her code visible on one slide. "That part is inefficient. You could make it faster." Jasmine stared at her sons in amazement. "How do you even understand what that is?" Martin shrugged. "We watch you work sometimes. It makes patterns." The symposium audience was larger than Jasmine had anticipated. She stood nervously at the podium, aware of her modest dress among the more expensively attired academics. In the front row, Dr. Chen's wife sat with the triplets, who watched their mother with unwavering attention. "The potential applications of this algorithm extend beyond traditional diagnostic settings," Jasmine explained, warming to her subject. "By identifying subtle pattern anomalies that precede acute cardiac events, we could revolutionize preventative care, particularly for underserved populations." During the question period, a cardiologist raised a challenging point about false positives. Before Jasmine could fully formulate her response, Malcolm's small voice piped up from the front row. "The threshold calibration accounts for that," he stated clearly. Mom added a secondary verification protocol. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Jasmine smiled apologetically. "My son has been observing my work, apparently." After the presentation, several medical faculty members approached with cards and questions. A hospital administrator expressed interest in early testing opportunities. Dr. Chen introduced her to potential collaborators. "Your work has evolved significantly," he noted as the event wound down. And your sons are remarkable. The little one corrected my wife's pronunciation of myocardial infarction. On the subway ride home, the boys bubbled with excitement about the university campus and the heart doctors who had spoken to them. "Can we go to college there?" Marcus asked seriously. "If you study hard and want to," Jasmine replied, smoothing his hair. "I want to make computers help people like you do," Martin said quietly. Malcolm nodded in agreement. "We could make better programs together, a family business." Jasmine pulled her sons close, overwhelmed by their innocent ambition and the unexpected success of the evening. For the first time since the triplets' birth, the future seemed to hold more promise than struggle. As she tucked them into bed that night, each in their matching pajamas, bought on clearance but treasured like designer wear, Jasmine felt a quiet certainty taking root. The path forward remained challenging, but no longer impossible. While she savored that simple victory with her sons, Jasmine didn't imagine that in just 5 years, she would be turning down a $1.2 billion acquisition offer for that same algorithm she had developed at a broken kitchen table. While she savored that simple victory with her sons, Jasmine didn't imagine that in just 5 years, she would be turning down a $1.2 billion acquisition offer for that same algorithm she had developed at a broken kitchen table. The spring of 2016 arrived with unexpected momentum. Jasmine sat rigidly in a sterile conference room at Manhattan General Hospital, watching as Dr. Singh reviewed the preliminary test results of her algorithm. The cardiologist's eyes widened as he scrolled through the data on his tablet. 93% accuracy in predicting early-stage arrhythmias, he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. And 97% for more serious conditions. This is remarkable, Ms. Taylor. Jasmine maintained her composure, though her heart raced. After years of late nights, countless revisions, and testing on limited datasets, her algorithm was finally proving its worth in a clinical environment. The pattern recognition capability is unlike anything we've implemented before, Dr. Singh continued. How did you develop this without institutional backing? One line of code at a time, Jasmine replied simply, between bedtime stories and school lunches. 2 months later, Dr. Raymond Chen sat across from Jasmine at a small cafe near Columbia University. The triplets, now 7 years old, occupied a nearby table, unusually quiet as they worked on their tablets, not playing games but coding simple applications they'd designed together. The hospital board is impressed, Dr. Chen said, sliding a folder across the table. They want to expand the trial to cardiac patients across 3 departments. And there's this. Jasmine opened the folder to find a loan application, partially completed, for $50,000 from the university's Technology Incubator Fund. It's time, Jasmine, Dr. Chen said gently. You need to establish a proper company. This algorithm could save thousands of lives. That evening, after tucking the boys into bed, Jasmine spread the paperwork across her small kitchen table. The loan would be enough to rent a modest office space, purchase necessary equipment, and hire part-time help. It was terrifying and exhilarating. "What are you doing, Mom?" Malcolm asked, appearing in the hallway despite having been put to bed an hour earlier. "Planning," Jasmine answered honestly. "For a business. For our future." Malcolm climbed onto the chair beside her, studying the papers with the intense focus that still sometimes startled her. "You should call it Taylor Tech Solutions," he said decisively, "because it's all of us Taylors working on solutions." The following week, Jasmine stood in an empty commercial space in a weathered brick building in Brooklyn. The real estate agent checked her watch impatiently. "It's the best I can show you with your budget," the woman explained. "Former print shop. Owners willing to include some of the built-ins." Jasmine walked the perimeter slowly, calculating dimensions, envisioning workstations and servers. The space was rough, exposed pipes, uneven flooring, windows that needed reglazing, but the rent was manageable with the loan. "I'll take it," she decided. The boys raced excitedly through the empty space when Jasmine brought them to see it that weekend. Marcus immediately began planning where different functions should be located, while Malcolm calculated the optimal arrangement for electrical needs. Martin simply stood in the center, turning slowly before announcing, "It feels right, Mom, like it's been waiting for us." Setting up the office became a family project. Jasmine purchased refurbished computers and second-hand office furniture. The boys helped install software and organize cables after school. On weekends, they painted walls and assembled desks purchased from discount warehouses. "This desk wobbles," Malcolm complained, testing a particularly inexpensive workstation. "Technical term is unstable structural integrity," Marcus corrected seriously, prompting laughter from Jasmine. Martin, always the problem solver, appeared with wooden shims he'd fashioned from packing materials. "This will fix it," he said confidently, sliding them under the uneven legs. Taylor Tech Solutions officially opened on a rainy Tuesday in September. Jasmine stood in the doorway of the modest office, keys in hand, overwhelmed by what she had set in motion: a proper company name, business cards, a rudimentary website created by the Triplets over a weekend. "Mom, we're going to be late for the client meeting," Malcolm called from inside, where he'd set up 3 small desks in the corner for homework and their increasingly sophisticated coding projects. The client meeting was with Dr. Singh and 2 other cardiologists from Manhattan General. Jasmine had prepared for weeks, refining her presentation, practicing responses to potential questions. What she hadn't prepared for was the triplets' participation. As she explained the technical specifications of the algorithm, Malcolm interrupted with a clarification about the processing protocols. Marcus smoothly added context about comparative diagnostic methods. Martin quietly corrected a minor error in one of her slides. The doctors exchanged bewildered glances. "Your assistants seem quite knowledgeable," Dr. Singh remarked with raised eyebrows. "My sons," Jasmine corrected firmly. "They've been part of this project from the beginning." The first major test of the algorithm came 3 weeks later. Manhattan General agreed to run it alongside traditional diagnostic methods for 50 cardiac patients, comparing results. Jasmine spent sleepless nights monitoring the system, addressing minor bugs, refining outputs. The triplets insisted on being present for the final demonstration. Dressed in matching button-down shirts and khakis, their business clothes as they called them, they sat solemnly in the back of the conference room while hospital administrators and cardiologists gathered to review results. Dr. Singh presented the findings with barely contained excitement. The Taylor algorithm correctly identified 17 cases that our standard protocols missed, including 3 that required immediate intervention. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the senior cardiologists raised his hand. "These could be coincidental correlations. I'd need to see—" The presentation screen suddenly flickered, displaying warning indicators. Martin was the first to notice, nudging his brothers. All 3 boys stared at the monitor with identical expressions of concentration. "Dr. Leibowitz," Malcolm called out clearly, standing up. "The system is detecting an anomaly in someone in this room." The room fell silent. Dr. Singh checked the monitor, then his tablet. "He's right. The ambient sensors we installed for the demonstration are picking up an irregular cardiac pattern." He looked up, scanning the room. "It's coming from Dr. Reynolds." The chief of cardiology scoffed. "Impossible. I had my annual physical 3 weeks ago." "The system is detecting early indicators of atrial fibrillation," Jasmine explained, moving to the monitor. "These patterns typically precede noticeable symptoms by weeks." After several tense moments, Dr. Reynolds reluctantly agreed to an immediate ECG. When he returned to the conference room 30 minutes later, his face was ashen. "The algorithm was correct," he admitted. "Beginning signs of atrial fibrillation. Had it progressed undetected?" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood the implications. That afternoon, Taylor Tech Solutions received its first official contract, a 6-figure agreement to implement the diagnostic system across Manhattan General's cardiac care units. As Jasmine signed the contract, Her hand steady despite her racing heart, she glanced at her sons sitting in the corner of her office, playing a coding game they'd invented. In that moment, David Blackwell's dismissive words from 7 years earlier, insufficient, common, without the necessary polish, seemed to echo and then dissolve into meaninglessness. News of the algorithm's success spread quickly through medical circles. A small article appeared in a healthcare technology journal. Breakthrough cardiac diagnostic tool shows promise in initial trials. The piece mentioned Taylor Tech Solutions and its innovative founder, with a small photo of Jasmine beside the hospital's chief of medicine. Jasmine taped the article to the office refrigerator. "Our first press," she told the boys. "The first of many." She hired 2 junior programmers, recent graduates recommended by Dr. Chen, to help with implementation and support. The modest office began to feel like a real company. Phones ringing, meetings scheduled, development timelines posted on whiteboards. The boys established their own corner of operations, coming to the office after school each day. They created an impromptu conference room from a card table and folding chairs, where they held what they solemnly called R&D meetings. One evening, as Jasmine worked late finalizing documentation, she overheard them debating improvements to the algorithm's user interface. "Doctors don't have time to interpret complex data visualizations," Marcus argued. "We need intuitive color coding for risk levels." "But oversimplification could lead to misinterpretation," Malcolm countered. "We need balance between accessibility and precision." Martin, typically the mediator, suggested, "What if we create multiple layers? Simple for quick assessment, detailed for those who need more information?" Jasmine paused her typing, listening in amazement as her 7-year-old sons discussed design principles that seasoned professionals often failed to grasp. 6 months after securing the Manhattan General contract, Taylor Tech Solutions had expanded to 5 employees and was fielding inquiries from 3 additional hospitals. The algorithm, now branded CardioPredict, had diagnosed over 200 cardiac conditions that might otherwise have gone undetected until reaching critical stages. As the company grew, so did interest from investors and competitors. Jasmine began receiving emails and calls from venture capital firms interested in exploring partnership opportunities. She declined most politely but firmly. "We're focused on development and implementation right now," became her standard response. "But we appreciate your interest." One rainy afternoon, Jasmine was reviewing applications for a new developer position when her office phone rang. The caller identified himself as a representative from Medcore Industries, one of the largest healthcare technology companies in the country. "We've been following your progress with great interest, Ms. Taylor," the smooth voice explained. "Our acquisition team would like to discuss bringing CardioPredict into the Medcore family of solutions." Jasmine hesitated before responding. "I'm not currently considering acquisition offers, Mr. Daniels. Perhaps you should hear our initial valuation before deciding," he countered. "We believe CardioPredict would be an excellent addition to our diagnostic suite. We're prepared to offer $7 million for the technology and related patents." The figure hung in the air between them. $7 million. Enough to secure her son's education, buy a proper home, establish financial security they'd never known. "Thank you for the offer," Jasmine replied carefully. "I'll need time to consider." That evening, as she helped the boys with homework in their small apartment, Jasmine weighed the proposition. The money would change their lives instantly. But selling meant surrendering control of her vision, the algorithm's accessibility, its application in underserved communities, its future development. "Mom, are you listening?" Malcolm's voice broke through her thoughts. "I asked about the distribution of prime numbers." Jasmine refocused, pushing the decision aside for the moment. Later, after the boys were asleep, she sat at her desk reviewing CardioPredict's latest performance metrics. The system had identified a congenital heart defect in a 3-year-old that 4 previous examinations had missed, potentially saving the child's life. Her decision crystallized. The next morning, she called Medcore. I appreciate your interest, Mr. Daniels, but CardioPredict isn't for sale. Taylor Tech Solutions will continue independent development and implementation. She hung up, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated by her choice. While Taylor Tech doubled in size every month across Manhattan, David Blackwell signed his divorce papers and faced the first of many financial crises, completely unaware that the woman he had called insufficient was becoming a name he couldn't escape hearing. While Taylor Tech doubled in size every month across Manhattan, David Blackwell signed his divorce papers and faced the first of many financial crises, completely unaware that the woman he had called insufficient was becoming a name he couldn't escape hearing. 3 years later, Jasmine stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Taylor Tech's new headquarters, watching Manhattan's skyline glitter in the late afternoon sun. They now occupied 3 floors of a commercial building in Midtown, a quantum leap from the humble Brooklyn space where they'd started. Behind her, the executive boardroom hummed with anticipation as her team prepared for the quarterly meeting. "Mom, the investors are arriving," Malcolm called from the doorway. At 10 years old, he carried himself with the confidence of someone twice his age, his button-down shirt and khakis replaced by a tailored navy blazer that matched his brother's. Jasmine smoothed her silk blouse, purchased new, not second-hand, and nodded. "Thank you, Malcolm. I'll be right there." The conference room filled quickly with board members and key investors. Where once Jasmine had struggled to get callbacks from potential clients, now venture capitalists and medical technology experts clamored for meetings. CardioPredict had achieved 99.4% accuracy in international clinical trials, transforming Taylor Tech from promising startup to industry leader in just 3 years. Before we begin, Jasmine addressed the room. "I'd like to acknowledge our newest hospital partnerships in Chicago, Boston, and Seattle. These implementations will bring our total to 73 major medical centers across the country." As she delivered her presentation, Jasmine couldn't help but notice the 3 identical faces watching intently from the back of the room. The triplets had insisted on attending all board meetings, absorbing complex business concepts with remarkable ease. Malcolm now understood financial projections better than some of their accountants. Marcus had mastered 6 languages to facilitate international expansion. Martin's redesign of the user interface had been praised in medical journals for its intuitive brilliance. "And now," Jasmine continued, "I'd like to introduce our expansion into neurological diagnostics. Malcolm will present the market analysis." Without hesitation, Malcolm approached the podium, tablet in hand. "Our projections indicate a 17% annual growth rate in neurological diagnostic technologies, with current solutions achieving only 72% accuracy in early detection of key disorders." The board members exchanged impressed glances as the 10-year-old confidently walked them through complex market statistics, fielding questions with poised precision. When Marcus followed with an overview of international regulatory requirements, delivering several key points in fluent Mandarin for the benefit of their Chinese investors, Jasmine felt pride swell in her chest. Later that evening, after the meeting concluded successfully, Jasmine found Martin alone in the development lab, refining a neural network algorithm on one of the powerful workstations. "It's getting late, sweetheart," she said gently. "The car is waiting to take us home." Martin looked up, his expression serious beyond his years. "I'm almost finished with this pattern recognition enhancement. It could improve detection rates for subtle epileptic markers by 23%. Jasmine touched his shoulder. "The work will be here tomorrow. Even brilliant minds need rest." In their Upper West Side apartment, spacious and sun-filled with separate bedrooms for each boy and a dedicated study, Jasmine ordered dinner from their favorite Thai restaurant. As they ate around the dining table, Marcus outlined his strategy for approaching European hospital systems. "Their procurement processes differ significantly from American models," he explained, gesturing with his fork. "We'll need localized approaches for each market. And we should consider pricing models that accommodate various healthcare structures," Malcolm added. "The universal systems will require different contract terms." Jasmine observed her sons with a mixture of awe and concern. They were extraordinary by any measure. Their teachers had long ago abandoned standard curricula in favor of personalized advanced studies, but sometimes she worried about the childhood experiences they might be missing. "What about school tomorrow?" she asked, deliberately changing the subject. "Isn't the science fair this week?" The boys exchanged glances. "We've completed our project," Martin said. "A simplified version of CardioPredict that works with a smartphone attachment. For educational purposes only, of course." "Of course," Jasmine echoed, suppressing a smile. The following morning, Jasmine arrived at the office early to prepare for a meeting with representatives from Johns Hopkins. She found an unexpected visitor waiting in reception, Carter Williams, CEO of Pharma Global, one of the largest pharmaceutical conglomerates in the world. "Ms. Taylor," he greeted her smoothly, rising from his seat. "I apologize for arriving without an appointment, but I believe what I have to discuss warrants the intrusion." In her office, Williams wasted no time with pleasantries. Pharma Global is prepared to offer $1.2 billion for Taylor Tech and all associated intellectual property. Jasmine maintained her composure, though her heart raced at the figure. "That's a significant offer, Mr. Williams." "It's a reflection of CardioPredict's market position and future potential," he replied. "We've been monitoring your expansion into neurological applications with great interest. Under the Pharma Global umbrella, these technologies could achieve global implementation much faster than Taylor Tech could manage independently." "And what would happen to our accessibility initiatives for underserved communities?" Jasmine asked, thinking of the programs they'd established in public hospitals across the country. Williams hesitated slightly. "Those would be evaluated based on profitability metrics, naturally. Our responsibility is to our shareholders." After he left, promising to send formal documentation, Jasmine sat alone in her office, contemplating the offer. $1.2 billion would secure her son's futures beyond imagination. It would validate everything she'd built from nothing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. "Did he make the offer? The investment team has been predicting this move for months." Jasmine smiled at her son's insight, unsurprised that the boys had anticipated Pharma Global's interest. Before she could respond, her assistant announced that a reporter from the Wall Street Journal had arrived for their scheduled interview. "Ms. Taylor," the journalist began after they settled in the conference room, "Taylor Tech has become the unexpected success story of medical technology. What drives your vision?" Jasmine considered the question carefully. "Access and accuracy. Healthcare technology often serves those who already have resources while leaving behind communities most in need. We're trying to change that equation." "And your rejection of several acquisition offers? That's unusual in this space." "I didn't build this to sell," Jasmine replied without hesitation. "I built it to transform lives." That afternoon, while reviewing security protocols for their new neurological diagnostic system, Jasmine's assistant interrupted with an urgent message. A hospital in Detroit using CardioPredict had identified a critical heart condition in a 6-year-old girl, a condition missed by 3 previous examinations. Emergency surgery had been successful, and the child's parents wanted to express their gratitude. As Jasmine took the video call, seeing the tearful mother beside her daughter's hospital bed, the Pharma Global offer seemed increasingly irrelevant. This was why she had created CardioPredict, not for billions, but for moments like this. "Your software saved our daughter," the mother said simply. "The doctors said she could have died within months if they hadn't found the problem." After ending the call, Jasmine made her decision. She drafted a brief, polite email to Carter Williams. "While I appreciate Pharma Global's interest, Taylor Tech is not for sale at any price. Our mission requires independence to fulfill." That evening, the quarterly innovation showcase filled Taylor Tech's largest conference space. Employees presented new projects and improvements while the triplets moved confidently through the crowd, discussing technical details with engineers and developers twice their age. Jasmine watched Marcus explain a complex internationalization protocol to their lead developer, his hands moving expressively as he outlined potential challenges. Nearby, Malcolm guided investors through financial projections with remarkable clarity. Martin, typically the quietest, had gathered a small crowd around his workstation as he demonstrated improvements to the neural network. "They're quite extraordinary, your sons," observed Dr. Chen, who had joined Taylor Tech's medical advisory board. "Harvard is already expressing interest, you know, for all three." "They're 10, Raymond," Jasmine laughed. "Let's get through middle school first." Later that night, scrolling through industry news on her tablet, an article caught Jasmine's attention. Blackwell Properties faces investor exodus amid corruption allegations. The piece detailed investigations into improper bidding practices for municipal contracts, with David Blackwell specifically named in several questionable transactions. A photo accompanied the article. David at a press conference, his face strained, hair noticeably thinning, standing beside lawyers rather than the society wife who had recently filed for divorce. The man who had once made Jasmine feel small and insufficient now appeared diminished himself, his empire crumbling while hers ascended. Jasmine felt no satisfaction in his troubles, only a strange sense of distance, as though David Blackwell belonged to another lifetime entirely. The following morning, during breakfast, Marcus looked up from his tablet with unusual hesitation. "Mom, we've been researching something." "What is it?" Jasmine asked, noticing the three boys exchange meaningful glances. "Our biological father," Malcolm said directly. "We know you've never wanted to discuss him, but we're curious." Jasmine set down her coffee cup carefully. She had always known this moment would come, had prepared for it in theory, yet now felt unprepared. "Why have we never talked about him?" Marcus pressed gently. "He chose not to be part of our lives," Jasmine answered carefully. "Before you were born. Did he know about us? That there were three of us?" Martin's quiet question cut to the heart of what Jasmine had avoided for a decade. "No," she admitted. "He made his choice before I knew I was carrying triplets. He made it clear that I didn't belong in his world." Malcolm's analytical mind worked visibly. "So he doesn't know we exist at all. Specifically, I mean." "He knows I was pregnant," Jasmine clarified. "He didn't want to be involved. I decided to respect that decision and build our own path." The boys absorbed this information with remarkable composure. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Thank you for telling us. We suspected it was complicated." "Are you angry?" Jasmine asked, suddenly vulnerable. "That I never sought him out, never tried to make him part of your lives?" Martin shook his head, his expression serious. "You created everything we needed. Why would we want someone who didn't want us?" "Besides," Malcolm added practically, "statistically speaking, children of single parents with strong support systems often outperform those in conflicted two-parent households. You optimized our environment for success." Jasmine couldn't help but laugh at his clinical assessment, though tears pricked at her eyes. "I love you three, more than anything in this world." "We know," they answered in unison, with the synchronicity that still sometimes startled her. As Taylor Tech continued its meteoric rise, opening offices in Tokyo, London, and São Paulo, the question of the triplets' father never arose again. By their 10th birthday, the boys had been featured in several publications as child prodigies in mathematics, languages, and engineering. CardioPredict and its newer neurological counterpart, NeuroSync, had collectively saved an estimated 1.4 million lives through early detection and personalized treatment protocols. While Jasmine and her sons celebrated these milestones, across Manhattan, David Blackwell fought to keep Blackwell Properties afloat amid lawsuits and declining investments, completely unaware that a small piece of his financial portfolio, a minority share in Taylor Tech acquired by his wealth manager without his knowledge of the founder's identity, was ironically his only remaining profitable investment. While Jasmine and her sons celebrated these milestones, across Manhattan, David Blackwell fought to keep Blackwell Properties afloat amid lawsuits and declining investments, completely unaware that a small piece of his financial portfolio, a minority share in Taylor Tech acquired by his wealth manager without his knowledge of the founder's identity, was ironically his only remaining profitable investment. Spring sunlight streamed through the gleaming glass facade of Taylor Tech's headquarters in 2022. The building itself, a sleek 40-story tower on Park Avenue, had become a symbol of innovation in Manhattan's evolving skyline. On the 38th floor, Jasmine reviewed quarterly projections while the city stretched out beneath her, a vastly different view from the cracked window of her grandmother's Harlem apartment 13 years earlier. The neurological diagnostic platform exceeded expectations by 27%, her CFO explained, scrolling through detailed charts on the conference room's wall-sized display, and the oncology detection system's clinical trials are showing 96% accuracy rates. Jasmine nodded, absorbing the information with the measured calm that had become her trademark. At 36, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that fashion magazines had recently labeled tech royalty elegance. Her tailored dress, from an emerging black designer she deliberately patronized, contrasted with the memory of second-hand clothes she once wore to job interviews where she'd been deemed unsuitable. The WHO representatives confirmed next week's meeting, her assistant added. They're particularly interested in implementing CardioPredict in developing nations. The global expansion represented everything Jasmine had envisioned during those sleepless nights coding while her infant sons slept. CardioPredict now operated in 712 hospitals across 27 countries. NeuroSync had recently been approved for widespread implementation after detecting early-stage neurological conditions with unprecedented accuracy. The oncology platform, OncAlert, promised similar revolution in cancer detection. Later that afternoon, Jasmine watched from her office as 3 identical Tesla vehicles pulled into the building's private garage. Minutes later, the triplets entered her office, now lanky 13-year-olds with the poised confidence of young men accustomed to moving through the world on their own terms. The MIT conference accepted our joint paper on predictive algorithms in neurodegenerative disease detection, Malcolm announced without preamble, setting his tablet on her desk. They want all 3 of us to present. Professor Harrington said it's unprecedented for researchers our age, Marcus added, his tone matter-of-fact rather than boastful, though he suggested we emphasize the practical applications rather than theoretical frameworks. Martin, typically the quietest, pulled up complex renderings on the wall display. I've redesigned the interface for the rural implementation, simplified without sacrificing functionality, accessible without consistent internet connectivity. Jasmine observed her sons with a mixture of awe and occasional concern. Their childhood had been unlike any other, raised within the ecosystem of a rapidly growing tech empire, attending an exclusive private school that had created special advanced tracks to accommodate their abilities and increasingly recognized in academic and business circles as prodigies in their own right. Before we discuss your conference, Jasmine said, how was school today? Anything beyond academics? The triplets exchanged their characteristic glance, a silent communication that had developed in utero and never diminished. Mrs. Abernathy asked about family history for the genetics unit, Malcolm said carefully. Everyone was discussing inherited traits. Jasmine felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied these moments. And what did you tell her? That we have limited data on paternal genetic contributions, Marcus replied with scientific detachment. But maternal inheritance has proven statistically favorable. The conversation shifted to dinner plans, but Jasmine noted the subtle tension remaining. The question of their father had evolved from the simple curiosity of children to the analytical interest of adolescents beginning to understand their place in the world. She knew a more comprehensive discussion was inevitable. That evening, in their Central Park West penthouse, purchased 2 years earlier when Taylor Tech went through a significant expansion, Jasmine sat with the boys in their shared study. The room reflected their personalities, Malcolm's section organized with mathematical precision, Marcus's area filled with books in multiple languages, Martin's space dominated by engineering prototypes and design sketches. "I received an interesting report today," Jasmine began carefully. "Our investment division acquired a portfolio that includes shares in Blackwell Properties." The triplets looked up with identical expressions of sudden interest. "Blackwell," Malcolm repeated, his tone neutral but eyes sharp. "As in, yes," Jasmine confirmed. "Your biological father's company." The room fell silent as the boys processed this information. "According to financial records, they're struggling significantly," Marcus observed, quickly pulling up data on his tablet. "Over-leveraged in failing luxury developments, 3 consecutive quarters of losses, and significant legal troubles regarding municipal contracts." "Is that why you're telling us now?" Martin asked quietly. "Because his company is failing while ours thrives?" Jasmine shook her head. "I'm telling you because you're old enough to understand the complexity of the situation. And because you deserve to know your full history, not just the parts I've chosen to share." She took a deep breath, then began the story she'd rehearsed countless times over the years. The complete version, not the simplified explanation she'd previously offered. She told them about meeting David at the Columbia Technology Showcase, about his initial charm and apparent interest in her ideas. She described their relationship, her naive belief that love had transcended class and social boundaries. Then, with careful honesty, she recounted that rainy November night when her pregnancy announcement had revealed the truth about how David saw her, as temporary, exotic, insufficient. "He said I didn't belong in his world," Jasmine explained, her voice steady despite the echo of pain. "That I was common, unpolished. He offered money to solve the problem and had security remove me from the apartment that same night." The boys listened with uncharacteristic stillness, their analytical minds processing this information with expressions that shifted between disbelief and controlled anger. "So he knows we exist," Malcolm clarified, "but not that we're triplets." "And he made no attempt to find out what happened?" Marcus asked, his usual diplomatic tone edged with something harder. "He made his choice," Jasmine replied simply, "and I made mine, to build a life where we would never need to feel insufficient in anyone's eyes." Martin, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. "Do you hate him?" The question surprised Jasmine. "No," she answered after a moment's reflection. "I stopped hating him years ago. That night was painful beyond words, but it forced me to find strength I might never have discovered otherwise." "Does he know about Taylor Tech?" Malcolm asked. "About what you've built?" "I doubt he's made the connection," Jasmine said. "The company bears my name, not his, and men like David rarely look closely at those they've dismissed." Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Jasmine found Malcolm in the kitchen, analyzing financial reports on his tablet. "You should be sleeping," she admonished gently. "Did you know Blackwell Properties is effectively insolvent?" he asked, ignoring her comment. "Their only performing asset is their investment in Taylor Tech through Meridian Capital Group. Ironically, they own approximately 2% of our company." Jasmine sat beside him. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the full story sooner." Malcolm looked up, his expression serious beyond his years. "You protected us from feeling rejected. That was logical." He paused, then added, "But according to my calculations, our net worth now exceeds his by a factor of 47. Would knowing that have been satisfying during difficult times?" Despite the gravity of the conversation, Jasmine laughed. "Perhaps, but satisfaction wasn't the goal. Freedom was." The following week, the triplets appeared in Forbes magazine's 30 Under 30 feature, identified as the youngest honorees in the publication's history. The article detailed their contributions to Taylor Tech's groundbreaking medical diagnostic systems and their independent research in artificial intelligence applications. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, David Blackwell sat in his significantly downsized office, reviewing the latest demands from creditors. The gleaming tower that had once housed Blackwell Properties headquarters had been sold to cover debts, and the company now occupied 2 floors in an aging building on the edges of the financial district. "Mr. Blackwell," his assistant interrupted tentatively, "the bank is on line 1 about the Greenwich property foreclosure." David dismissed the call with a wave, turning instead to the financial reports his wealth manager had delivered that morning. Buried among the disappointments was a single bright spot, a small investment in a medical technology company that had inexplicably outperformed everything else in his portfolio by several orders of magnitude. "What's this Taylor Tech investment?" he asked when his wealth manager called. "It's the only thing keeping us afloat." "Medical diagnostic systems," came the reply. "Revolutionary stuff. We acquired a small position during their second funding round. Would you like me to increase our stake?" "Yes," David agreed without hesitation. "Double it if possible." He had no way of knowing that his financial salvation came from the woman he had once deemed unworthy of his world. As fall approached, the triplets began receiving letters from elite universities expressing interest in their potential early admission. Harvard's mathematics department made overtures to Malcolm, Princeton's international relations program courted Marcus, and MIT's engineering school actively recruited Martin. "They're 13, Jasmine reminded Dr. Chen when he brought up the university's interest. "They need to be teenagers before they're college students." "Exceptional minds develop at their own pace," he countered gently, "and they've already academically outgrown their current environment." That evening, as the family shared dinner in their penthouse dining room, Malcolm cleared his throat with uncharacteristic hesitation. "We've been thinking," he began, glancing at his brothers for confirmation. "If we ever encountered our biological father, what would we want to say?" Jasmine set down her fork, giving the question the serious consideration it deserved. "That would be entirely your decision. You owe him nothing, not explanation, not forgiveness, not anger." "But hypothetically," Marcus pressed, "would you be opposed to us meeting him someday?" "I would never stand between you and any choice you make about your identity or history," Jasmine assured them. "But I would want to protect you from potential rejection." Martin, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "From what you've told us and what we've researched, he seems like a man who values external markers of success above all else. Perhaps that's all he would see in us now, assets with Harvard acceptance letters." The insight, cutting in its clarity, hung in the air between them. "Whatever decision you make," Jasmine said finally, "remember that your worth was never determined by his recognition. You were extraordinary from your first breath, long before the world noticed." As the boys returned to their studies after dinner, Jasmine stood at the penthouse windows gazing out at the city lights. Somewhere in that constellation of illumination was David Blackwell, unaware that 3 remarkable young men carried his genetics but none of his values. Unaware that the woman he had discarded as insufficient now commanded boardrooms where his name inspired no recognition. The irony wasn't lost on her, but neither was it important. Her focus remained where it had been since that rainy night when 3 heartbeats had given her the courage to rebuild from nothing. On the extraordinary future she was creating with her sons, not the painful past they had transcended. While the family Taylor discussed hypothetical encounters with David Blackwell, the fate already had marked the date for the confrontation. The Metropolitan Gala of the following year, where their paths would cross in such a public and explosive way that all of Manhattan would be forced to choose sides. While the family Taylor discussed hypothetical encounters with David Blackwell, fate had already marked the date for the confrontation. The Metropolitan Gala of the following year, where their paths would cross in such a public and explosive way that all of Manhattan would be forced to choose sides. April in Manhattan arrived with its customary burst of renewal. Cherry blossoms adorned Park Avenue as Jasmine reviewed the invitation that had appeared on her desk that morning. Embossed on heavy cream cardstock, the Metropolitan Gala invitation represented the pinnacle of New York society, an annual gathering of power, influence, and wealth that had once seemed as inaccessible to her as the moon. "The committee requests your presence as an honoree," her assistant explained, "for your contributions to medical technology and global health initiatives." Jasmine ran her fingers over the raised lettering, remembering a time when such an envelope would never have found its way to her. 7 days before the gala, the Taylor Tech Board convened for their quarterly strategy meeting. Seated at the head of the conference table, Jasmine watched as Malcolm presented projections for their oncology platform with the precision of a seasoned Wall Street analyst. OneAlert's early detection capabilities have reduced mortality rates by 23% in participating hospitals, he explained, gesturing toward complex data visualizations. "We're on track to expand to 300 additional facilities by fourth quarter." At 13, nearly 14, Malcolm carried himself with remarkable poise. His voice had begun to deepen, and his features were sharpening into what would eventually become a handsome, commanding presence. Beside him, Marcus and Martin watched attentively, each ready to contribute their specialized expertise to the discussion. The invitation to the Metropolitan Gala arrived, Jasmine mentioned as they returned to their penthouse that evening. "It's the weekend before your birthday." The triplets exchanged their characteristic glance of silent communication. "Will you accept?" Marcus asked, already scrolling through his tablet. The attendee list typically includes key figures from medical foundations and global health organizations, potential partners for our WHO initiative. "Always the strategist," Jasmine smiled. "Yes, I'll accept, and you three will accompany me." Later that night, Jasmine found herself unable to sleep. She stood at the window of her bedroom, gazing at the city lights scattered like earthbound stars. The Metropolitan Gala represented a world that had once explicitly rejected her, a world that David Blackwell had declared she could never belong to. Now she would enter not as someone's guest or accessory, but as an honoree, a peer to the city's elite. Meanwhile, across the city in a modest Upper East Side apartment, a significant downgrade from his former residence, David Blackwell stared at his own invitation to the Metropolitan Gala. It had not come directly to him, but through Gregory Hamilton, his former Harvard roommate who now sat on the board of several financial institutions. "David, old friend," Gregory had said over lunch at a club that had once welcomed David as a member before his financial troubles. "You need to get back into circulation. The gala is the perfect opportunity to remind people of the Blackwell name." David ran his hand over his thinning hair, noting with dismay the new lines that had appeared around his eyes. At 47, he looked a decade older, the strain of 2 divorces and a crumbling business empire evident in his appearance. "I don't know, Greg," he sighed. "Those events aren't what they used to be. They'll let anyone in these days." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "That anyone includes people who might still be willing to invest in Blackwell properties. Pride won't save your company, David." The invitation sat on David's desk for 3 days before he finally sent his acceptance. His second ex-wife had taken his preferred tuxedo in the divorce, he noted with irritation. He would need to have a new one made, an expense he could ill afford but couldn't avoid if he wanted to maintain appearances. As the date approached, preparations accelerated on both sides of the city. In the Taylor penthouse, a parade of designers presented options for Jasmine and the triplets. "I want something from an emerging designer," Jasmine specified, "preferably someone with roots in Jamaica or elsewhere in the Caribbean." Her style team eventually presented sketches from a young Nigerian-Jamaican designer whose star was rising rapidly in the fashion world. The resulting gown, a contemporary interpretation of traditional West African design in luminous gold fabric, fit Jasmine perfectly, transforming her into a vision of modern royalty. For the triplets, the team created identical custom tuxedos with subtle details that reflected their individual personalities, mathematical patterns in Malcolm's lining, international symbols in Marcus's, and innovative structural elements in Martin's. "We look like proper gentlemen," Marcus observed as they tried on the finished garments. "Statistically speaking, we'll be the youngest attendees by approximately 4 years," Malcolm added, adjusting his cuffs with precision. Martin, ever observant, noticed Jasmine watching them with a mixture of pride and something else, perhaps apprehension. "Are you concerned about the gala, Mom?" Jasmine smiled reassuringly. "Not concerned. Just aware that we'll be entering a space that once defined itself by excluding people like us. It's a significant moment." The boys understood more than she realized. They had researched extensively, compiling information about their biological father and the world he inhabited. They knew exactly what the Metropolitan Gala represented in the social hierarchy that had once deemed their mother unworthy. Across town, David Blackwell met with his financial advisors, the news growing increasingly dire with each report. The Westchester development is 3 months behind schedule and 30% over budget, his CFO explained grimly, and the Jersey City project has attracted only 7 buyers for the 43 available units. "What about the tech investments?" David asked desperately. "That medical company, Taylor something, it was performing well last quarter." "Taylor Tech remains your strongest performing asset," the advisor confirmed, "but your position is relatively small. It would take a significant expansion of that investment to offset the real estate losses." "Then expand it," David ordered, not bothering to investigate the company further. "Double our position if possible." The morning of the Metropolitan Gala dawned bright and clear. Jasmine woke early, reviewing preparation for a major announcement planned for the following week: Taylor Tech's groundbreaking partnership with the World Health Organization to implement CardioPredict and NeuroSync in 50 developing nations. The triplets approached the day with their characteristic methodical efficiency, reviewing the guest list and researching key attendees they might engage with during the event. Senator Matheson will be present, Marcus noted. His healthcare committee oversees federal research grants. "And Dr. Eliza Chen from the CDC, Malcolm added. "Her support would be valuable for the global implementation strategy." Martin looked up from his tablet. "Mom, did you know that Blackwell Properties is listed among the corporate sponsors? It's a lower-tier contribution but still noted in the program." Jasmine paused, absorbing this information with practiced composure. "It's a large event with many sponsors. I doubt we'll cross paths." But as the afternoon progressed toward evening, she found herself wondering about the possibility of an encounter. What would David look like now, 15 years later? Would he recognize her immediately? Or would she be just another face in the crowd of successful people he now needed to impress? As stylists arrived to prepare them for the event, Jasmine pushed these thoughts aside. Tonight wasn't about the past. It was about celebrating what she and her sons had built together, a legacy of innovation and purpose that had already saved more than 1 million lives worldwide. In his much smaller apartment, David struggled with his bow tie, cursing softly as his fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar task. His valet had been among the first luxuries sacrificed to financial necessity. Finally managing a passable result, he surveyed himself in the mirror. The tuxedo, while well cut, couldn't disguise the toll that stress had taken on his once athletic frame. Still, the Blackwell name carried weight, he reminded himself. People respected legacy and history, even in difficult times. By 7 o'clock, Manhattan's wealthiest and most influential citizens began arriving at the Lincoln Center, transformed for the evening into a glittering showcase of power and privilege. Media lined the red carpet, cameras flashing as celebrities, business titans, and political figures made their entrances. David arrived alone, nodding to acquaintances with practiced nonchalance that masked his inner anxiety. He needed connections tonight, needed to remind potential investors that Blackwell Properties remained a force in New York real estate despite recent setbacks. Gregory met him at the entrance, champagne already in hand. "David, excellent. Several people I want you to meet tonight. Saudi investment group looking for New York opportunities. Right up your alley." Inside, David accepted a drink and surveyed the room with the practiced eye of someone who had once been at the center of this world. The faces were largely familiar, the same elite circle that had embraced him as one of their own until his fortunes began to turn. At 8:30, a black limousine pulled up to the red carpet. Photographers, initially casual, suddenly surged forward as Jasmine Taylor emerged. The golden gown caught the light dramatically, its innovative design immediately drawing appreciative murmurs from the fashion correspondents. But it was Jasmine herself, radiating confidence and purpose, who commanded attention. She paused momentarily, waiting as three identical young men in perfectly tailored tuxedos joined her. The triplets moved with synchronized grace, flanking their mother protectively as they navigated the gauntlet of cameras and reporters. "Ms. Taylor, looking at Taylor Tech's extraordinary growth this year. Dr. Taylor, can you comment on the rumors about a WHO partnership? Malcolm Marcus Martin, will you be attending university next year despite your age?" They handled the questions with practiced ease, offering polite but substantial responses that revealed intelligence beyond their years. Watching the coverage on monitors inside, David paid little attention to the commotion surrounding the latest arrivals. His focus remained on identifying potential saviors for his troubled company. As Jasmine and the triplets entered the main hall, heads turned appreciatively. Senator Mitchell approached immediately, eager to discuss healthcare initiatives. The governor's wife complimented the boys on their recent feature in Scientific American. Two Nobel laureates requested introductions. Across the room, Gregory nudged David. "You should meet Jasmine Taylor, most influential woman in medical technology right now. Taylor Tech is revolutionizing diagnostic medicine globally." David nodded absently, scanning the room for the Saudi investors Gregory had mentioned. "Later, perhaps. Let's focus on the funding prospects first." While Manhattan's elite mingled in carefully choreographed social dances, neither Jasmine nor David realized how close they were to a collision 15 years in the making. In the grand ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and flower arrangements costing more than many families' monthly rent, fate prepared to orchestrate an encounter that would leave one of them triumphant and the other shattered. While preparing for the evening, Jasmine hadn't foreseen that David Blackwell, now divorced for the second time and struggling to maintain his businesses, would be present at the same gala thanks to a last-minute invitation from an old college friend who saw the event as an opportunity to help David attract investors, a destiny that had set their paths to cross in Manhattan's most public and prestigious gathering. While preparing for the evening, Jasmine hadn't foreseen that David Blackwell, now divorced for the second time and struggling to maintain his businesses, would be present at the same gala thanks to a last-minute invitation from an old college friend who saw the event as an opportunity to help David attract investors, a destiny that had set their paths to cross in Manhattan's most public and prestigious gathering. The Lincoln Center glowed under strategic lighting, transforming the architectural landmark into a jewel box of aspirational glamour. Outside, a steady procession of black cars deposited Manhattan's elite onto the red carpet. Photographers jostled for position, their flashes creating a strobing effect against the darkening spring sky. Inside the grand ballroom, David Blackwell sipped his third scotch, the alcohol doing little to ease the tension in his shoulders. He scanned the room with practiced nonchalance, nodding to former associates who now regarded him with the careful distance reserved for those in financial decline. "The Saudi investment group just arrived," Gregory murmured, steering David toward the entrance. "Remember, they're looking for distressed properties with development potential. Frame it as an opportunity, not a rescue." David straightened his posture, summoning the confident persona that had once come naturally. The last 5 years had been brutal. The market downturn, the divorce settlement with Catherine that had claimed his Hamptons estate, the municipal contract scandal that still shadowed the Blackwell name. Yet tonight, in his custom tuxedo, he could almost believe he remained the same man who had once casually discarded people who didn't meet his standards. A commotion near the main entrance drew attention away from their conversation. Photographers surged forward, their flashes intensifying. The crowd parted instinctively as Jasmine Taylor entered the ballroom, resplendent in gold that caught and reflected light with every movement. The gown, architectural in its precision while appearing effortlessly fluid, transformed her into a living embodiment of success. "Who's that?" David asked absently, noting the stir her arrival created. "Jasmine Taylor," Gregory replied, surprised by his friend's ignorance. "Founder of Taylor Tech, worth about $9.4 billion. She's revolutionized medical diagnostics globally." David watched with mild interest as the woman proceeded into the room, flanked by three identical young men in impeccably tailored tuxedos. Something about her struck him as vaguely familiar. Perhaps they had crossed paths at previous industry events. "Those are her sons," Gregory continued. "Triplets, certified geniuses, all of them. Youngest people ever featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30. The company's named after them, Taylor." David's glass paused halfway to his lips. "Taylor," he repeated, a distant memory stirring. "What's her background?" "Self-made. Started with nothing, built an empire. The classic American dream, only she actually achieved it." Gregory chuckled. "She's expected to win Innovator of the Year tonight for the 7th consecutive time." David continued watching as Jasmine navigated the room with effortless grace, stopping to chat with a Supreme Court justice. The three young men beside her moved with identical fluid precision, their confidence evident even from across the room. A strange uneasiness took root in David's chest. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite place. He studied her face, trying to connect it to the vague recognition tugging at his memory. "The boy's father?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself with the question. Gregory shrugged. "Unknown. Not in the picture. Some say she's never revealed his identity even to them." The discomfort in David's chest intensified. He found himself counting backward. 15 years since that rainy night when he had sent Jasmine, his Harlem scholarship girlfriend, away. 15 years since he had dismissed her pregnancy announcement as an inconvenience, offered money to solve the problem. 15 years since he had told her she was insufficient for his world. His eyes snapped back to the young men. They would be 14, nearly 15 now. The timing aligned perfectly. But triplets? Surely she would have mentioned that detail. As though sensing his scrutiny, one of the triplets turned, scanning the room with analytical precision. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded space. David felt the glass slip from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that drew momentary attention. "David, you okay?" Gregory asked, signaling a server to clean up the mess. David couldn't respond. In that young face, he had seen his own reflection from 20 years earlier, the same eyes, the same jawline, the distinctive Blackwell brow that had marked the family for generations. "I need some air," he managed, moving unsteadily toward the terrace doors. Outside, the spring night enveloped him, but did nothing to cool the burning realization spreading through his mind. Those boys, those poised, brilliant, accomplished young men, they carried his blood. They were his sons. Sons he had never known, never acknowledged, never watched grow. And their mother, the woman he had deemed common and insufficient, now moved through Manhattan's elite with more ease and respect than he commanded. The irony was so perfect it seemed scripted by a vengeful god. When David re-entered the ballroom, his gaze locked immediately on Jasmine, now speaking with the governor. The proximity allowed him to study her more carefully. The confident posture, the intelligent eyes, the subtle signs of maturity that had only enhanced her natural beauty. How had he not recognized her immediately? He made his way toward the bar, positioning himself where he could observe without being obvious. The triplets had separated slightly, each engaged in different conversations with various luminaries. One discussed economic policy with the Treasury Secretary. Another conversed in what sounded like fluent Mandarin with Chinese diplomats. The third explained complex technological concepts to a group of venture capitalists. They were extraordinary, any fool could see it, and he had rejected them before they had even entered the world. "Another scotch, sir?" the bartender asked. "Double," David replied, his throat suddenly parched. As he waited for his drink, fate orchestrated the moment he had been unconsciously dreading and desiring in equal measure. Jasmine approached the bar, momentarily separated from her sons. "Sparkling water with lime, please," she requested, her voice carrying the same melodic quality he remembered, now tempered with authority. David froze, his back to her, hearing her just inches away. 15 years of successful avoidance collapsed into this single, inevitable moment. He turned slowly. "Jasmine," he said, her name emerging as little more than a whisper. She turned, professional smile in place, clearly not recognizing him immediately. Then, as their eyes met, the smile faltered. Recognition dawned, followed by something unreadable, not quite shock, not quite anger, but a complex emotion that settled finally into perfect composure. "David Blackwell," she acknowledged with a slight nod. What an unexpected surprise. Her calm threw him off balance. He had expected anger, bitterness, perhaps even a scene. Instead, she regarded him with the polite interest one might show a former colleague from a distant workplace. "You look successful," he managed awkwardly. "Thank you. Taylor Tech has performed beyond expectations." She accepted her water from the bartender with a grateful smile. "The boys," David blurted, abandoning pretense. They're mine, aren't they?" Jasmine's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Biologically speaking, yes. They share your DNA." "Triplets," he said, the word still amazing him. "You never told me they were triplets." "I didn't know when you threw me out," she replied, her voice level but with an edge that cut like steel. And afterward, there seemed little point in sharing information with someone who had made his disinterest so abundantly clear. David's scotch arrived, and he took a large swallow, needing the liquid courage. I made a mistake." "Did you?" Jasmine asked, her tone genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "Your life proceeded exactly as you planned, didn't it? Marriage to Catherine Mitchell, expansion of Blackwell Properties, the social position you valued so highly." Before David could respond, one of the triplets approached, the one who had been speaking with the Treasury Secretary. "Mom, the governor would like to discuss the implementation timeline for the Rural Healthcare Initiative before your speech," he said, then turned, noticing David. "Oh, hello." "Malcolm," Jasmine said. "This is David Blackwell. David, my son, Malcolm." David stared at the young man, seeing himself in the intelligent eyes and confident posture. "Hello, Malcolm," he said, his voice unsteady. It's good to meet you." "Blackwell Properties?" Malcolm asked, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Interesting. I recently read a case study about how not to manage capital in times of crisis. Your company was the primary example." The calculated precision of the comment left David speechless. This wasn't a child lashing out emotionally. This was a clinical assessment delivered with the detached accuracy of a surgeon's scalpel. Before the uncomfortable moment could extend further, the evening's formal program began. The Master of Ceremonies welcomed guests and announced the commencement of the awards presentation. Jasmine was called to a reserved table at the front, her sons joining her with synchronized grace that spoke of years of public appearances together. David found himself guided back to Gregory's table, positioned with a clear view of Jasmine. Throughout the initial presentations, he could focus on nothing but the back of her head, the triplets seated beside her, the easy familiarity they shared as a family unit, a family that had never included him. When the time came to announce the Innovator of the Year, the result surprised no one. Jasmine rose to enthusiastic applause, making her way to the stage with the confident stride of someone accustomed to recognition. "Thank you for this honor, which belongs equally to the remarkable team at Taylor Tech," she began, her voice clear and compelling. "Innovation frequently begins with necessity. 15 years ago, I found myself pregnant, alone, and being told I wasn't sufficient to belong in certain circles of Manhattan." A murmur rippled through the audience. David felt himself shrinking in his seat as heads turned subtly in his direction. Apparently, the connection was already being made by those familiar with both their histories. That moment of absolute rejection planted the seeds of an empire that today saves millions of lives annually. Jasmine continued, her gaze sweeping the room with poised confidence. To my sons, Marcus, Malcolm, and Martin, who never needed an absent father because we built our own definition of family, you are my greatest achievement. Not the billion-dollar contracts, not the 237 medical patents, not our market valuation of nearly 10 billion. You are the living proof that when someone says you're not enough, the appropriate response is to become extraordinary. The applause was deafening. David remained frozen in his seat, each word landing like a sentence in a public judgment he had never anticipated facing. When Jasmine returned to her table, she was embraced by her sons, then surrounded by admirers and well-wishers, effectively creating a barrier between her and the rest of the room. As the formal program concluded and guests began moving toward the after-party, David found himself propelled by desperate impulse. He intercepted the Taylor family as they moved toward the exit, security and assistants forming a protective formation around them. "Jasmine, please," he said, his voice strained with urgency. 5 minutes. I need to explain, to apologize, to meet my sons." It was the quietest of the triplets who stepped forward, his expression calm but assessing. "Sir, our family values time and purpose. You demonstrated possession of neither when it mattered. Unfortunately, your request doesn't meet our criteria for priority." It was the quietest of the triplets who stepped forward, his expression calm but assessing. "Sir, our family values time and purpose. You demonstrated possession of neither when it mattered. Unfortunately, your request doesn't meet our criteria for priority." The morning after the Metropolitan Gala, Manhattan awoke to what the Taylor Tech public relations team would later describe as an unprecedented media tsunami. Jasmine's phone began ringing at 5:37, her chief communications officer's voice tight with controlled excitement. "You might want to see the Times front page," she advised, "and the Journal. Actually, all of them." Jasmine opened her tablet to find her own face staring back from the digital front page of the New York Times beneath the headline, "From Abandonment to Empire, The Extraordinary Journey of Jasmine Taylor." The Wall Street Journal had opted for the more financially framed "The Unknown Heirs, How Blackwell Lost the Greatest Generational Opportunity." She closed her eyes briefly, taking a measured breath. The confrontation at the gala had been inevitable from the moment she spotted David across the ballroom. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly the story would explode beyond their private drama. Within hours, the narrative had spread across every platform. Former employees from the building where she and David had lived 15 years ago confirmed details about her abrupt expulsion. Columbia classmates recalled David's dismissive comments about his exotic adventure with the Harlem girl. His third ex-wife, currently navigating a contentious divorce, offered scathing insights into his character and treatment of women. By 9 o'clock, Jasmine had declined 17 interview requests and instructed her team to issue a simple statement. Ms. Taylor is focused on Taylor Tech's upcoming WHO partnership announcement and has no further comment on personal matters at this time. On Wall Street, the market responded with ruthless efficiency. Blackwell Properties shares plummeted 28% in the first hour of trading, while Taylor Tech climbed 12%. Investment analysts issued urgent updates framing the story as a perfect metaphor for David's business acumen, or lack thereof. How could he not recognize Jasmine Taylor's potential when he had direct access to it? Demanded one CNBC commentator. If he couldn't see the value in front of him, then how can investors trust his judgment now? In their penthouse, protected from the media frenzy by excellent security and strict privacy protocols, Jasmine gathered her sons in the living room for the conversation she had deferred for 15 years. "You've always known your father was alive," she began carefully, meeting each of their identical gazes. but I chose not to allow his rejection to define our lives. Last night, the universe forced a confrontation I didn't plan or anticipate. Malcolm, ever analytical, leaned forward. Why did he never look for us? After he knew you were pregnant? Because he made it abundantly clear that I didn't belong in his world, Jasmine replied with careful honesty. I decided we would create our own world where his words held no power. Marcus, the diplomat, considered this with characteristic thoughtfulness. But you never legally pursued child support. Many would have. I wanted nothing from him that might come with strings attached, Jasmine explained. Nothing that would give him influence over our lives or your futures. Martin, the quietest and most perceptive, studied his mother carefully. Were you protecting us from rejection, or protecting yourself from having to see him again? Both, Jasmine admitted after a moment. At first it was raw self-preservation. Later, as you grew and showed such extraordinary gifts, I became determined that you would never experience what I did, being measured and found wanting by someone incapable of seeing true value. Malcolm, always calculating probabilities, examined his tablet with sudden interest. Did you know that through our various investment vehicles and subsidiary funds we effectively control 17% of Blackwell properties? His lips curved in a rare, mischievous smile. Considering their current market vulnerability, we could execute a hostile takeover within weeks. Jasmine shook her head firmly. We didn't build our legacy to destroy others. Our company saves lives. That's our purpose. The intercom chimed, interrupting their conversation. The security desk reported that David Blackwell had arrived and was requesting entry. The four Taylors exchanged a glance of silent communication developed over years of moving through the world as a unified front. After a moment, Jasmine nodded. Send him up. Minutes later, David Blackwell entered their penthouse, clutching a bouquet of flowers that seemed hastily purchased. His appearance was markedly different from the previous evening, his expensive tuxedo replaced by a rumpled suit, his face haggard with sleeplessness. He stood awkwardly in the entrance of their spacious living room, taking in the tasteful luxury of their home with poorly concealed surprise. I came to beg your forgiveness, he began, his voice lacking the commanding tone it had possessed 15 years earlier, and to meet my sons properly. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for a chance. Jasmine gestured toward the sofa, taking a seat across from him with the poise that had become her trademark. The triplets arranged themselves around her, not defensive, but watchful. A chance, Jasmine repeated, her tone surprisingly gentle. David, I think you're misunderstanding something fundamental. I don't harbor resentment or anger toward you. I don't need your apology or your regret. That terrible night was ultimately the best thing that happened in my life. Confusion spread across David's face. How can you say that? I destroyed your life. No, Jasmine corrected with a small smile. You merely liberated me from a life as your shadow. If we had stayed together, I would have been known only as David Blackwell's wife. Now you're known as the man who rejected Jasmine Taylor. It's a significant difference. David flinched visibly at the precision of her assessment. But our sons, my sons, Jasmine corrected gently but firmly. Martin, usually the most reserved of the triplets, studied David with scientific curiosity. Mother always taught us to appreciate the obstacles that strengthen us. Technically, we should thank you for your absence. It taught us self-reliance in ways your privileged presence never could have. David turned to face him, desperation evident in his expression. You're my children, he insisted, his voice cracking. I have rights. Rights? Malcolm interrupted, his analytical mind engaging. An interesting choice of words from someone who voluntarily abdicated all responsibilities. Our family structure is complete. Your contribution was strictly biological and, statistically speaking, replaceable. The clinical assessment delivered in his son's young voice seemed to wound David more deeply than any angry accusation could have. He slumped slightly, the flowers forgotten in his lap. "I didn't come here to fight," he said finally. "I came to offer anything. Money, connections, my name." Marcus actually laughed, the sound genuinely amused rather than cruel. "Your name? Taylor Tech is valued at $9.4 billion. Blackwell Properties barely reaches $200 million now, with debts of approximately $140 million. Mathematically speaking, your name would devalue ours." David stared at his son, recognition dawning of how completely the power dynamic had reversed. These boys, his biological sons, had assessed his worth using the same cold metrics he had once applied to their mother and found him similarly lacking. Jasmine rose gracefully, signaling the end of the conversation. "David, we're not closing doors out of resentment. There simply aren't doors to open. We built our life without you, and it's extraordinary. Perhaps that's difficult to accept, but your presence wouldn't add value to our lives now." "You don't need a father?" David asked, a final desperate attempt. "We needed one," Martin corrected gently. 15 years ago. That moment has passed." The security team appeared discreetly at the entryway, ready to escort David out. As he rose to leave, he looked back at the family tableau, Jasmine standing tall and confident, flanked by 3 young men who carried his genes but none of his values or weaknesses. "I really did love you once," he said quietly to Jasmine. "In my own way." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but your way wasn't sufficient." After David's departure, Jasmine moved to the window, gazing out at the city that had once made her feel insignificant. Manhattan now seemed remarkably small viewed from her penthouse heights. "Are you okay, Mom?" Marcus asked, joining her. "More than okay," she assured him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Just reflecting on how completely we've exceeded every limitation others tried to place on us." That evening, the Taylor family boarded their private jet bound for Geneva, where the World Health Organization would implement the Taylor diagnostic systems in developing countries. The program would save approximately 4.6 million lives over the next 5 years. David Blackwell watched from a bar television as the announcement of the global partnership was broadcast internationally. As cameras captured Jasmine and her sons descending from their plane in Switzerland, greeted by international dignitaries, he finally comprehended the magnitude of his loss. It wasn't merely a family he had rejected that rainy night, but an entire future he had failed to envision. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Jasmine Taylor signed the largest healthcare contract in global history, surrounded by the sons who carried her name and legacy. Her thoughts did not dwell on David, on revenge, or on the past. Her focus remained where it had always been since that night of abandonment, on the extraordinary future she had built with her own hands. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.